Oftentimes the right decision and what you ought to do is not the majority decision. The majority decision oftentimes is not the right decision. It's not a good decision. It's groupthink. There's a lot of conversation nationally of why our youth like socialism so much. Well, they don't have an alternative to capitalism. There isn't an alternative to capitalism. The only real problem our society really has that are unsolvable is those created by government. Because we don't all have tanks. So when you can't take on the government, you tend to want to take on the fix, the system, corporations, wealthy people, and you start believing that profit is greed. What we never really insist on is repealing law. In my book, TheFiscals, The Reinvention of the United States by Affect, Not Effect, volumes 1 and 2, I suggest we get off the income tax. Not to repeal Amendment 16, because that would take forever, but definitely reduce it back to its original 1%. To replenish the government for its needs for public services that is not social services, public services like law enforcement, highways, ports, military to defend us against enemies, foreign and domestic. They don't seem to want to go away. They're just getting bigger and stronger as our military gets bigger and stronger. We need to go to something I suggest called invoice taxes. Invoice taxes are collected by the Department of Revenue of each state. And it's based on breaking down the invoice taxes on higher and lower established by government. So that the politician has skin in the game by lowering and increases very particular industry targeted invoice taxes. For instance, raw material tax would have its own tax. It'd be lesser tax if the raw material is used to make products in the United States, and a higher tax if it's exported outside of the United States. Then there would be a tax for an assembly, kind of like the VAT tax, and another tax at the point of sale. Sure, you might say that this is a VAT tax. Well, guess what? If we don't go to consumption taxes, we're going to have the income tax, the corporate tax, and the VAT tax. The World of the Fiscals, The Reinvention of the United States, by Affect, Not Effect. Copycat tax summation. Copycat taxes are duplicative, 1% invoice taxes throughout the factors of production on material goods, products, and services paid by vendors. Copycat taxes are allocated to specific departments of the federal budget. The federal government department's general fund for administration, operation, and payroll will be funded solely by a cumulative 1% tax on invoices instead of the progressive income tax. The state governments will continue to be funded with a maximum 7% wholesale vendors tax to retailers. The individual states' respective departments of revenue will collect the copycat taxes and the 7% merchants tax equal to not exceed 17% of total consumption taxes. Both forms of tax will be itemized separately on all commercial transactions of resaleable material and product throughout the manufacturing process to final retail sale. State government will continue to charge real estate taxes on real property. The invoice taxes are triggered as the product is being assembled throughout the factors of production or in the manufacturing and assembly process. There will be a tax per invoice as vendors participate in production to the point of sale to the end consumer. The trail of tax begins as raw material providers supply subcontractors, then brand manufacturers, then wholesalers, all the way to the retail sale. The total invoice tax cannot exceed 17% to the consumer in any state of the United States. If so, the state portion of the sales tax must be reduced. If there is an invoice, there is a tax. An additional 3% manufacturer's tax is applied to the final product at the wholesale level for all imports from American companies that assemble abroad. It is reduced by 1% if the final product contains more than 50% American-made parts. Throughout the raw material excavation process, the creation and delivery of palletized bulk material to lumber yards, steel mills or iron smelters, as well as micro or macro assembly facilities, to the finished product, a 1% tax is incurred at each stage of the manufacturing process. This tax is levied on everything that an individual can buy at the retail level. From bubble gum to cigarettes, automobiles to airplanes, hairspray to lipstick, cell phones to iPods, flat screen TVs to MP3 players. If consumer products are assembled or manufactured in a foreign country, the final product will be taxed at a maximum total import duty tax of 15% on all bills of lading to the wholesaler or importer, and the 7% sales tax at the point of sale to the consumer. Tax-free exemptions. All organic food for human consumption and livestock is tax-free throughout the farming, harvest, poultry, or cattle herding process. Byproducts include processed food and packaging of produce. All medicines and dietary supplements to consumers are tax-free throughout the manufacturing process, from laboratory to retail. Federalist number 21 and invoice taxes. In Federalist number 21, Alexander Hamilton expressed his desire to fund the federal government through a consumption tax as opposed to the progressive income tax well stated in the Karl Marx Communist Manifesto. Hamilton understood the natural harmony of organic personal consumption of products and services as the reality of choice in good times and bad. Thus, as individual consumers within the economic ecosystem of all 50 states are harnessed by how much they buy. This activity would also impact statist government bureaucrats' ability to promote the growth of government without the means to raise taxes, without the wrath of the voter taxpayer. Effectively limit the size of the federal government without coercion, but rather by the individual choices of the American people being the great equalizer. He states the following: it is a signal advantage of taxes on articles of consumption that they contain in their own nature a security against excess. They prescribe their own limit, which cannot be exceeded without defeating the end proposed, that is, an extension of the revenue. When applied to this object, the saying is, as just as it is witty, that in political arithmetic, 2 and 2 do not always make 4. If duties are too high, they lessen the consumption. The collection is eluded. And the product to the Treasury is not so great as when they are
confined within proper and moderate bounds. This forms a complete barrier against any material oppression of the citizens by taxes of this class, and is itself a natural limitation of the power of imposing them. Invoice taxes. We, the fiscals, contend that a person's salary or wage is private property the moment his or her precious time and labor, skill and craft, health and well-being are exchanged for compensation. The sweat off your brow while laboring in farm fields, construction sites, refineries, coal mines, stores, offices, and factories is not replaceable in time and place. It no longer has value because a moment and exhausted time cannot be returned to a laborer. Therefore, it cannot be taxed. Unlike other assets, stocks and bonds that have income appreciation potential due to extemporaneous factors, such as community property, described as interstate highways, maritime ports, secured navigational shipping lanes, international waters, and the general peace and welfare of the United States to conduct business enterprise freely, can be taxed accordingly. Understanding this different taxing authority, it is incumbent on the American people to advocate for national invoice taxes. These different taxes are to be designated for the funding of specific federal and state government departments based on the tangible product or service contained therein. The various federal invoice taxes the fiscals propose are pallet tax, copycat tax, raw material tax, and invoice tax. An invoice tax can only be increased by open floor debate on the floor of the United States House of Representatives. The President of the United States, by written invitation to Congress, may initiate the debate to call for a vote by a simple majority of both houses of Congress to lower any particular invoice tax separately as a measure to stimulate the economy from time to time. A 2/3 supermajority vote of the House and Senate must be met to approve increases in any invoice taxes. The purpose of the exercise is to announce to the public what branch of government is initiating the increase in taxes. The American people can decide at the ballot box, which is to be held accountable on Election Day. The constitutional authority remains solely in the House of Representatives, per the United States Constitution, by giving the exclusive power to the executive branch to start the debate in his or her formal request. The president has skin in the game politically. The president and Congress will be held to a higher standard when the U.S. economy grows or recesses as a result of their tax policies. This new taxing dynamic will strike a natural balance against the Federal Reserve's board prime rate decisions and the minimum reserve balance requirements to all banks. The effect of these actions will be more noticeable to the general public. The fair tax is just too damn high. On the other side of the consumption tax argument is the consumption tax alternative as proposed by fairtax.org. The one-size-fits-all tax is a much higher tax rate at 23% than the invoice taxes the fiscals propose on all purchases. The fair tax is tough to sell politically. Such a high tax on a broad spectrum of goods and services is too broad. It does not create a hierarchy of taxes for the microeconomies in the overall U.S. economy. Some industries are adversely impacted directly and in a manner that results in uncompetitive values of scale. Such a cocktail will undermine whole sectors of the U.S. economy and thus debilitate the effect of employing the American people. This fair tax proposal is likely to be abused by statist politicians and may require keeping the IRS in place for collection purposes. The low-wage earner who is presently unemployed or without the modern technological tools to compete in the labor market will become destitute under a fair tax. Why is the flat tax such a popular alternative? After 30 years of political banter, the reason why the flat tax proposal is more plausible propaganda for both mainstream political parties in America is that liberals and statists alike agree that the flat tax keeps and requires the Internal Revenue Service to remain in place